play set together. Crazy. Go buy stuff. Everybody's coming to my house for Christmas dinner, so that's going to be interesting. Lots of people that don't know each other. Hopefully, they'll all get along. I'm sure they will. Okay, so where did we leave off? We were talking about all of the air assets that intermixed between Iran Contra, the savings and loan, and who was financing them all. We talked about response air. We talked about the Aidan Khashoggi and his weapons deals, Aero Air, Pan Aviation, Global International. So just a refresher memory. So we start off by talking about Global's creditors in its bankruptcy case with a mysterious Southern California aircraft company that had defaulted on a multi-million-dollar loan from one of the biggest failed savings and loan in the country, tying the two together. Response Air had its headquarters in Laguna Hills, California. Its principal place of business in 1983 was a hangar at Richard Scabar Air Force Base in Kansas City. Response Air's principal business was the sale of aircraft parts and supplies, according to its incorporation paperwork. It had been incorporated in Miami in 1984, which is very interesting, but it's doing business in Kansas City and had its headquarters in California. That's weird. Was it set up by the CIA in Miami with all the rest of the CIA operations in Miami? In October 1984, a year after Global declared bankruptcy, Response Air submitted a claim to Global for $155,000 in parts that it had never been paid for. Global's bankruptcy attorneys responded with a lawsuit to cover $93,000 Global paid to Response in the 90 days preceding its bankruptcy. No officers of Response could be located to serve a lawsuit on. And Global's bankruptcy attorneys filed paperwork stating that Response had forfeited its California charter for non-payment of taxes and was being investigated by the IRS. The CEO of Response Air was John Campbell, a very common name. But the registered agent of Response was Joseph Ventresca, Ventresca. When the author searched for Joseph Ventresca, he found one listed in Southern California area where Response was headquartered. He claimed there was another one in the area, and that's who he wanted to talk to. I'm not that guy, which has a very unique name. There's another guy with the exact same name. You want that guy. Response Air was closely connected to a Texas company called Ransom Aircraft. It was controlled by Louis T. Ransom of Dallas. In 1983, Ransom Aircraft consigned almost $20 million of aircraft parts to Response to sell. Response would get a third of the profits. In 1984, when Bill Ransom signed a lease in Miami again for Ransom Aircraft, his signature was witnessed by Response's representative and registered agent, none other than Vernon Craig. Y'all remember who Vernon Craig is? Holy crap. In late 1970s, Ransom was at the center of an airplane scandal in Australia, where his companies, Global Jet Sales and Parmax of Fort Worth were trying to buy 12 Lockheed C-130 cargo aircraft owned by the Australian Air Force. A scandal erupted when it was discovered that Ransom's company intended on selling the cargo airplanes to Libya. Although Ransom apparently did not buy the planes because of the publicity, he registered them with the US FAA. Most of the C-130s were eventually brought to the US under the control of a San Francisco law firm called Ford and Vallejo, Vlahos. Two of the cargo planes were destined for none other than the Colombian airline. When federal authorities stopped the transfer, fearing the planes would be used by the cartel for narcotics trafficking. One of the C-130s, according to former Pentagon investigation Gene Wheaton, ended up in Mesa, Arkansas. You know, where Barry Seal is. The aircraft arrived in Mena after Seal was murdered, according to Wheaton. Ransom's partner in the Australian C-130 attempted purchase was Max Parks. Park has also been associated with Ian Dr. Doom Smalley, who was a British arms dealer and PhD economist. That's an interesting combination. I'm an economist PhD who on the side does arms deals. Okay. Smalley was arrested in Texas in 1982 in a government sting operation for conspiring to buy tanks and anti-tank missiles in the U.S. for an illegal sale to both Iran and Iraq. Smalley was acquitted after his attorney, Richard Racehorse Haynes, convinced the jury that his client had been entrapped by the government. In the fall of 1983, Sunbelt Savings Associate of Dallas made a loan to Ransom Aircraft secured by a $20 million new and used DC-8 parts. Now, I'm just going to throw this out here to you guys. DC-8s at this time primarily were coming from the Flying Tigers, from Claire Chennault's operation in Southeast Asia, flying drugs. Because, and I know this personally because UPS bought a bunch of them and I worked on them and for Evergreen Airline, which was a CIA proprietary front. So, according to the lien filed for that loan, the very next lien filed in the state records was a consignment of these parts to Response Air at Richard Scabar Air Force Base with a joint venture of Ransom and Sunbelt. So this document ties all of those together. Less than 2 years later, Sunbelt filed a lawsuit against Ransom and Response for defaulting on the loan. Documents in the lawsuit state that the DC-8 parts, which included 21 Pratt & Whitney jet engines, were purchased from Delta Airlines. The parts were listed on Delta's books at a value of $23 million, according to the lawsuit. It also stated that Sunbelt lent Ransom $1.5 million in August 1983 and $1 million in September, using the DC parts as collateral. Sunbelt ultimately received a court judgment against Response Air for the $1.5 million, but it was unable to connect. Now, again, just anecdotal information. These Pratt & Whitney jet engines were required because the old DC-8s met no FAA sound requirements for flying into commercial airports in the United States. They had to re-engine all of the DC-8s. Several of ours were taken out of commission at UPS and sent both inside the United States down to Miami, and some were sent to France to get new engines put on them that met the sound requirement. So I'm familiar with all of this stuff. I just had no idea. And I mean, and this was in the 1980s when this was all happening. I had no idea what was going on behind the scenes. This is just, to me, a crazy story. A federal regulator familiar with Sunbelt and the savings and loan actually said that the savings and loan actually lent the $20 million that was recorded in the Texas lien records. None of the money lent on the aircraft parts was repaid to Sunbelt, which finally failed in 1996, or excuse me, 1986, under the weight of the defaulted, delinquent, and worthless loans. 2 years later, Sunbelt merged with 7 other insolvent Texas savings and loan, including Jarrett Wood Western Savings, at a bailout cost to you and I of estimated $2 to $3 billion. That's a lot. Sunbelt Savings, known in the industry as Gunbelt Savings, was controlled by Ed McBurney. He was a wheeler dealer nicknamed Fast Eddie. McBurney's beginnings in the thrift industry go back to George Aubin and Jarrett Woods, with many connections to mobster Herman Beebe. Before McBurney consolidated several smaller Texas savings and loan into Sunbelt, he was the president of Texoma Savings in a small town in North Texas, close to Oklahoma. Through McBurney and Aubin, a mutual association of theirs, John Roberts, a San Antonio developer, purchased Commerce Savings in Angleton, Texas, from Jarrett Woods. McBurney and Aubin split a $300,000 commission on the sale. Then McBurney would go on to help Woods get rid of some of the bad loans on Commerce's books to facilitate the sale of the savings and loan to Roberts. Roberts, as noted earlier, was involved in the huge deals in Houston and Colorado with weapons trafficker Aiden Khashoggi. In 1983, McBurney had control of Sunbelt and Woods had control of Western Savings. The two began making multi-million-dollar deals between them. Other big borrowers at Sunbelt included Thomas Gaubert, who was owner of Independent American Savings Association, Joe Russo, one of the Kappa Sigma guys, who was the head of Ameriway Savings, Casey Hood, who had been the president of Beebe's umbrella company, AMI, before he took control of Western Savings, and a guy by the name of Joseph Gross, who was a Chicago mobster who ran San Joaquino Savings. McBurney also had several direct dealings with mobster Beebe. One was just a straight loan to McBurney on an apartment project in Dallas. Another one was something completely different. McBurney wanted Sunbelt to buy an airplane for his use. So he went to Herman Beebe, mobster, to get a loan from Beebe's Bossier Bank and Trust. Beebe told him that Bossier didn't have the cash on hand to make the loan, but that wasn't a problem, not for a mobster. Bossier got the cash by selling participation in a few loans on the books to Carol Kelly at Continental Savings. And where did Continental Savings get the money? Why, from Sunbelt, of course, which bought certificates of deposits from Continental. So this round-robin exchange meant the money to buy Sunbelt's plane for McBurney ultimately came from Sunbelt itself. This is a good example of the way the savings and loan operated, and would serve as a warning to investigators that unless the track of money was followed, you weren't going to find the real story. One federal investigator who was trying to track the loans, Richard Rossmiller, got from Hill Financial Savings that he had previously worked on the Butcher Brothers bank scandal in Tennessee. So he had experience in tracking this money. But the most curious loan Sunbelt made has to be the one to ransom aircraft and response air for the $20 million aircraft parts. Savings and Loan in Texas during the 1980s made lots of unusual loans, most of them not allowed. But the Sunbelt loan on the new and used DC parts appeared very unique. The DC 8, like the 707, was a dinosaur. Beginning in 1985, the two aircraft couldn't operate in the US without special and expensive noise limiting equipment that I just described to you with personal experience. So the parts were probably headed overseas, although ASMA's Global International Airways was apparently Response Air's biggest customer. It doesn't seem likely that the parts were destined for Global, which used the 707s, not the DC 8s. After Global declared bankruptcy in late 1983 and Capital Air declared bankruptcy in 84, the IRS began investigating ASISMA, and the FAA stopped 707s from operating here. The Iranian native moved himself and his business to London. He started a company called Aviation Leasing Group, which owned airplanes and leased them to other companies rather than operating them themselves. He built up his fleet to around 50 airplanes and said he wasn't ever going to do business directly in the United States. That's because he was under investigation by the IRS and had already declared bankruptcy here twice. In February 1989, he snuck back into the United States. Without any fanfare, he bought a small cargo airline in Waco, Texas, called Buffalo Airways. Buffalo Airways was incorporated in Texas in 1982 by Wordy Jack Thompson Jr., a Dallas attorney. Thompson also was an incorporator along with Bill Ransom of Global Jet Sales. He was also involved in Ransom's attempt to sell the C-130s to Libya. Small world. In 1986, Thompson was convicted of lying on loan applications for a condominium loan from Empire Savings in Mesquite, Texas. Empire was the first savings and loan failure in Texas. Thompson was sentenced to 4 years in prison and fined $10,000. Shortly before he was convicted, he was disbarred for refusing to give clients money they had won in civil lawsuits. Thompson was convicted on 4 counts of falsifying documents, including overvaluing a condominium he owned in Mexico on a loan application he made to Empire State in November of 1982, just 1 month before he incorporated Buffalo Airways. Dwayne Sheehy, executive VP at Buffalo, said he didn't know who Thompson was and that Thompson now has no relationship to Buffalo. In a written statement to reporters, Azizma's attorney said, "The fact that Mr. Thompson incorporated the organization is of no significance." Sure. Sheehy said Buffalo did not start operations until 84 when it began with 2 707s. At first, he said Buffalo operated passenger charters. Then he went on to work for Burlington Air Express, flying night freight. Buffalo had 5 aircraft then and sold a couple of them to Burlington. Then we were the unsuccessful bidders in a second contract with Burlington. We went back to ad hoc freight business from 1984 to 88. That's the official story. The company that got a great deal of Burlington work was none other than Southern Air Transport, the CIA front. Asked whether Buffalo did business with the CIA, Sheehy said, absolutely not. However, there's an entry in Oliver North's White House notebook that indicates otherwise. On March 21st, 1985, North received a phone call from Alan Fiers, the director of the CIA's Central Task Force, the guy that was heading up the whole Contra stuff down in Latin America, who would later plead guilty to withholding information from Congress during the Iran-Contra investigation. Fires reported that a pilot for a Buffalo Airlines 707 flying from Poland to Guatemala was on the ground in London. The next entry states, "Friend in Seattle." Then underneath that, "Arms," with an ampersand and dollar signs. So it appears that Buffalo Airways was flying arms from Poland to Guatemala for the CIA and Oliver North when they ran into some problems in London and had to call the CIA. And if I remember correctly, there's a story in another book about it was discovered what was on that aircraft and they weren't going to let the aircraft take off. But Buffalo allegedly fell on hard times, and by February 1989, when Azizma bought Buffalo, it only had one airplane. However, Azizma quickly poured the money in, and by the end of 89, the company had 6 707s and was continuing to fly Madrid, Spain, and Stansted, England. Azizma said he bought Buffalo as an insurance policy for his leasing business in the event that any company stopped leasing some of his aircraft. So, moving on. Now we're going to talk about Jim Bath. Jim Bath arrived in Houston in 1965. He was 29, looking for a job. In the next 20 years, Bath would become good friends and do business with George W. Bush, the president's son. He would go into real estate with Leon Benson, the senator's son. He would work for Edward DuPont's Atlantic Aviation, yes, of the DuPont family. He would take a partner, as a partner, a former Atlantic Aviation executive who was a board member of an organization that provided aircraft for the Contras. He also became the trustee for 2 of the richest families in Saudi Arabia, including one that owned a Saudi bank that provided financing for Aden Khashoggi, around the exact same time that Khashoggi and Ghorbanifar was selling arms to Iran and taking the money to the Contras. The highest profile member was indicted in the summer of 1992 on fraud charges relating to the CIA front bank, BCCI. He also formed a Cayman Islands company, because anybody that works in Houston that does business with Aden Khashoggi, the Saudis, and George W. Bush and Senator Benson's son is going to need a Cayman Islands bank account and company. So the other principals were also of the Cayman Islands company. They were also in a Cayman Islands company that was a key intermediary for Oliver North's The Enterprise in moving private donations to the Contras. And the companies involved were Buffalo Airlines, Skyways Aircraft Leasing, and Azizma's Global International. He also, during this same time, became an asset of the CIA, supposedly recruited by Bush Sr. He also, this guy's very busy, provided office space for Reza Pahlavi, the late Shah son, who was known as Baby Shah, and was in contact with the CIA doing that. He would also form a company with a former Air America pilot. He also owned stock in Charter Bank, whose directors included Trine Starnes Jr., a big Contra supporter and large borrower from Silverado Savings, and several BB-backed savings and loans. He also did business with Jack Trotter, Walter Mitchner's close associate, who was the trustee for Senator Lloyd Benson's blind trust. He also got sweetheart gasoline deals at Houston Ellington Field from none other than the Department of Defense. He would borrow money from Lamar Savings and Mainland Savings, which we covered earlier. Bath is originally from Louisiana. In a deposition in a lawsuit in Houston, he stated that he attended 3 small colleges in Louisiana, basically going to a school where I could find work, and he worked in radio and TV. He then joined the Air Force, where he became a fighter pilot for 5 years. His service included 3 years stationed at Richards Gabar Air Force Base. That's interesting. So he's very familiar with that base where all of these other CIA affiliated airlines are doing business. When he left the Air Force in 1965, he moved to Houston. I immediately began flying and pulling alert at the National Guard. That would be the same guard that George Bush Jr. was assigned to. Yes, it is. It was at the National Guard that Bath met George Bush. They became very good friends. According to Bush, never did any business together. Yeah, we just know each other. We do all of the same business, but we didn't do that business together. Records filed in a lawsuit in Houston involving Bath contradicted Bush Jr. They show Bath was an investor in Bush's oil and gas enterprise. Bush did say that Bath is a lot of fun. Bath also met Lloyd Benson III, one of the senator's sons, at the Air National Guard because he was there too. Do you see how that works? Bath first got a job in Houston selling aircraft for a Dallas-based company called Brown Arrow Corporation. Brown Arrow opened a Houston office where Bath worked for about 3 years. In 1968, he was hired by Atlantic Aviation Corporation and opened an office in Houston. In the early 70s, he was promoted to vice president of the aircraft division of Atlantic and basically commuted between Houston and Wilmington for the next several years. That's according to Bath himself. Atlantic Aviation is headquartered in Wilmington, Delaware, where the DuPonts are, and is reportedly the largest business aircraft sales and service company in the world at the time. It is owned by one of the wealthiest DuPonts, Edward. Active in the Republican Party in Delaware and cousin to the former Delaware governor, Pierre DuPont, Edward was an officer of the $2 billion family holding company, Christina Securities. He and his immediate family owned or controlled more than $72 million in EI DuPont common stock. Richard DuPont, who owned the CIA-connected Summit Aviation, also served on the board of Atlantic Aviation. This is how you tell it's a CIA proprietary. When Bath was working at Atlantic, he negotiated a distributorship agreement with Israel Aircraft Industries. This company was founded by Adolf Al Schwimmer, an American-born Israeli arms dealer and special advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres. Schwimmer, along with I don't know how you say this guy's name, Yaakov Rimrodi. I'll spell it for you. Yaacov. His last name is Nimrodi. He's an arms merchant as well and was the former IDF attaché to Iran. You know, where we're going to be sending all those missiles. Gabonifor was also there. And Miriam Nier, NIR, who was advisor to Perez on counter-terrorism, and Khashoggi. They began devising ways to gain the release of hostages held in Lebanon and open dialogue with Iran. Just give them some missiles, which is exactly what they proposed, and work with Khashoggi and Mainland Savings to do just that. In 1973, Bath quit Atlantic Aviation and joined Lan Benson, Senator Benson's son, to form Bath Benson Interest. They developed an apartment complex outside of Houston, some airport hangars, which would be very convenient, and a few other real estate deals in Houston. Although they parted company in 76, according to Benson and Bath's deposition, Bath continued to use Bath Benson letterhead. In July 1990, Bath wrote a letter on Bath Benson letterhead to the FAA asking for information about the registration of 2 aircraft. Benson told the Houston Post in a written statement that he and Bath are periodically involved in the disposition of the properties acquired from 1972 to 76. Bath also stated in his 1987 deposition that Lan Benson and I still had ongoing partnerships from when we were actively in partnership doing deals. The year Bath and Benson separated in 1976 was a banner year for Bath. In March, he started an airplane company, Jim Bath and Associates, with Johnson Taylor, a pilot with 27 years military experience. Taylor had also worked at the CIA proprietary Atlantic Aviation. On March 7, 1986, a groundbreaking story in the Texas Observer on private assistance to the Contras identified Taylor as being a board member and supporter of a St. Louis-based group called Wings of Hope. The story stated that Wings of Hope provided a plane to another group called Mercy Flight, which was bringing wounded Contras out of Honduras. Another Wings of Hope board member, George Hadaway of Lindell, Texas, told the Texas Observer that crucial support for their organization came from Taylor. Every time he sold a big airplane, he sent us 10%. So we latched onto him pretty quickly. Hadaway also said, I must admit my whole life has been spent concerned with the containment of Marxist doctrine in the Western Hemisphere. The author of the Observer piece, Dave Dennison, said Wings of Hope was also involved in the government health program. Where? Belize. Yeah, where the CIA has their arms camps, terrorist training camps, that Belize. They were flying in and out of there all the time. Several months after Bath and Taylor started Jim Bath and Associates, Bath got a huge break. He was named the trustee of Sheikh Salam bin Laden's of Saudi Arabia, a member of the family who owns the largest construction company in the Middle East. He's going to be the trustee for his business in the United States. Bath's job was to handle all of bin Laden's North American investments and operations. Mr. CIA front guy? Bin Laden? Yeah. As a side note, Mohammed bin Laden was a patient of Adnan Khashoggi's physician father and got Khashoggi involved in his first deal as a weapons middleman. This was a truck cell that Khashoggi engineered in the 1950s, just after he had returned from college in the United States. So the world's largest weapons dealer was educated in the United States. Khashoggi sent a $25,000 commission to bin Laden, who returned it to Khashoggi. According to federal law enforcement sources, bin Laden also did business with Salam Saab, a Lebanese who was partner in the Cayman attorneys Ian Paget Brown in a company called Sarah Limited, which borrowed money from mainland savings. These sources said Saab, S-A-A-B, listed on his resume a contract that he had with bin Laden that was secured by a November 1984 letter of credit. Several months after Bath was named as trustee for bin Laden, he became the trustee for Sheikh Abdullah Baroum, Baroom, who owned a large Saudi Arabia cement and steel company. So this guy's like the trustee for Brown and Root in America. Then sometime later, he began working for Sheikh Khalid bin Mafsoud, the former chief executive officer of the National Commercial Bank in Saudi Arabia, which was behind BCCI's financial foundation, the CIA front bank. Sheikh Khalid remained in his position at the National Commercial Bank, NCB, until 1 week after he and his London-based associate, Harun Kaloun, were indicted in New York in 1992 on charges that they schemed to defraud regulators, auditors, and depositors in the BCCI. At the same time, the Federal Reserve Board announced that it had found Sheikh Khalid and NCB had violated American banking laws because they had tried to buy, they didn't try to buy, they actually bought 4 U.S. banks illegally through front people that we've talked about before when we covered BCCI. He also bought a luxury penthouse apartment on Fifth Avenue in New York and stock in the M Corp, which we talked about earlier. It was NCB that lent some $35 million to Khashoggi in the summer of 1985. Around the same time, Khashoggi was getting $12 million from mainland savings to buy all of those missiles. Sheikh Khalid was an investor in Main Bank in Houston, along with Jim Bath. Also, an investor was former Texas Governor John Conley, and Gaith Perrone, another CIA indicted in the BCCI scandal. In February 92, Perrone, David Paul, and William Berry were indicted in Miami on charges related to the collapse of Sintrust Savings, the largest failed savings and loan in Florida. Perrone, who was named in 2 counts in the 22-count indictment, had good company with the shenanigans perpetrated at Sintrust and ultimately the American taxpayer. So you had involved in that Charles Keating, BCCI, Michael Milkins, and others involved. BCCI, the author notes that BCCI was an international bank of choice for CIA covert operations. It was their front bank. And it talks about some of their shenanigans, which I'll name briefly here. The running of surveillance of Abu Nidal's terrorist network out of their branch in London. They were actually running that terrorist organization, the CIA was. They were connected to bank accounts opened by Oliver North in BCCI's Paris branch. BCCI operated, had an account with Adon Khashoggi and an association with Monte Carlo's branch of BCCI that Adon Khashoggi used in his arms deals. Sheikh Khalid bought into Main Bank with Bath Conley, and Perrone in 1976. Conley sold his investment in 1980 to make a run for the Republican presidential nomination. So, hey, let me get out of this CIA maze of bank corruption, because real quick, I'm going to clean up and run for president. Holy crap. Then in 1981, Mercantile Texas Corporation, Capital Bank's holding company, and soon to be M Corp, bought Main Bank from Khalid. In 1979, Khalid purchased River Oaks Mansion from Chester Reed, the father-in-law of John Ballas, who pleaded guilty in savings and loan fraud. The Saudi sheikh purchased the house for $4 million through an attorney at Baker and Botts, which was also handling all of Bath's dealings. One of Bath's closest business associates was Charles White, who had graduated from the Naval Academy with Oliver North, and then went to be a fighter pilot in the Navy. White earned an MBA at Harvard. Is that where he was recruited? He then was recruited in 1978 by Lan Benson to work with him in Bath. So I'm going to say yes. In 1980, White and Bath formed a real estate development company. White and Bath split up in 86 and began a fierce legal battle over a $550,000 certificate of deposit in a Cayman's Island company that Bath headed. Bath asked White to help him meet the note's payment by taking funds from other partnerships with no liability note. In other words, just move the money around and not keep track of it. White refused to do that. White has lost most of his legal fights and is bitter at Bath and his associates, who he claims railroaded him to keep him from exposing Bath's CIA and Saudi connections. White said Bath told him in 82 that he worked for the CIA. No shit, Sherlock. White stated that Bath said he was recruited in 76 by George Bush, the future president, and then CIA director, and given the assignment of monitoring the activities of Saudi Arabian investments. I'm going to say he wasn't monitoring them. He was making them on behalf of the CIA, because Saudi Arabia at the time was corrupt and in bed with George Bush, as later demonstrated in the Carlyle Group, which Jim Baker and George Bush was intimately involved in. And once they accumulated a whole bunch of military industrial complex stock, offered Saudi Arabia, all these same sheiks, an investment in, and they all got rich off of it. White said that one time in 82, he and Bath were at the Ramada Club in Houston when Vice President Bush walked in. Bush waved at Bath and said, "Hey, Jim." So obviously they knew each other on a first-name basis. Another Houstonian who knows Bath on a first-name basis is Walter Mitchner. White met Mitchner when he and Bath were visiting the insurance giant American General, which was Mitchner's partner in the Cinco Ranch development. Bath and Mitchner obviously knew each other fairly well. Bath's company borrowed $800,000 from Allied Bank and $200,000 from another Allied Bank. That's $1 million. Mitchner said that he knows Bath, but just to shake hands with him. Sure. One of Mitchner's business partner, Jack Trotter, is listed as a reference on Bath's resume. A source close to Bath said that Trotter was one of the Houstonians most responsible for introducing Bath around Houston and getting him all the right connections. Bath and Lan Benson brokered a number of multi-thousand-dollar tracts to syndications formed by Trotter, who was the trustee for Senator Lloyd Benson's blind trust. Another reference on Bath's resume is Sidney Adger, the father of John Adger, Robert Corson's former partner, and also a fellow member of that Kappa Sigma fraternity. A small Houston accounting firm, Weatherford, Kenton and Associates, which allegedly did work for Michener's company, also did the accounting, according to White, for Bath's interesting companies such as Skyway Aircraft Leasing. However, when Michener was asked about Weatherford Kenton, whose office itself is in the headquarters building of Michener's office, he said he didn't know any of them. Skyway Aircraft Leasing started business in July of 1980 as a company called Cotopax Investments, Cotopax. And where was it registered? Not in Texas. It was registered in the Cayman Islands. 29 days later, they changed their name to Skyway Aircraft Leasing. The directors met in Georgetown, Grand Cayman. And interestingly enough, the meeting was a week before the name change was registered in the Cayman Island Authority. So I guess they got together and decided they were just going to change the name. The directors named Bath as president and director, and then all the rest of the directors resigned, leaving Bath in charge. All of the stock was made into bearer stock, which meant that it belonged to whoever possessed it. In his sworn deposition in a lawsuit against White, Bath refused to name the owners of the Skyway stock. Documents filed in another lawsuit indicate that Sheikh Khalid owned Skyways. White said Skyways had at least one airplane, a Gulfstream, that was on a long-term lease to Dubai Oil Company. The original subscribers to the original company, who then turned Skyway Aircraft Leasing over to Bath, were K Haven Corporate Services of Georgetown, David Bird of Georgetown, and Grant Stein of Georgetown. Bird and Stein are both directors of K Haven Corporate Services and attorneys with Walker and Company, a Cayman Islands, Georgetown company that was headed by William Walker. K Haven Corporate Services and Bird were two of the three subscribers to the Cayman Islands company, also another company called IC Inc., which was incorporated in 85. IC sits right in the middle of a chart drawn by Oliver North. You remember that he had a chart that said IC, and then he had all of these lines going out to everything else. So these people are all involved in the Contra network called the Enterprise. All right. The money started with the donations to Spritz Chanel's National Endowment for the Preservation of Liberty. We talked about that a little bit before. NEPL. Then it was wired from NEPL's account to Palmer National Bank. That's Stefan Halper's CIA front bank in Washington, D.C. He would then put it into the account of IBC. IBC is a public relations company formed by Republican Richard Miller at another Washington bank. IBC would then wire the money to IC in the Cayman Islands, which then transferred the majority of it to a Swiss bank account registered to Norse Enterprise. That's money laundering. On March 7th, 87, the Washington Post published the only account of these transactions. It called the flow of money a circuitous route, and then stated, quote, "It is not clear from the documents who is behind IC Inc., the Cayman Islands company, or why it was needed to transfer the money," unquote. Apparently, no investigator in the Tower Commission probe of Iran-Contra or the congressional hearings of Iran-Contra ever tried to get to the bottom of who was behind IC. One person behind K Haven Corporate Services and the original subscribers to IC and Skyway Aircraft Leasing in the Caymans was an attorney, William Walker. Walker had been an attorney in the Caymans for 30 years. Where is he originally from? The country of Guyana. K Haven Corporate Services was what is called a captive manager. This is a company that handles self-insurance plans for companies that want to take advantage of tax-free environments in the Cayman Islands. In 1988, a news story from the Caymans said K Haven primarily provides accounting services and quoted K Haven manager Malcolm Davies saying that K Haven is not actively seeking new captive clients and expects to keep a low profile. Premium volume for the captives under K Haven's management total less than $14 million, he said. In 1986, K Haven was replaced as the agent for Skyways by Caledonian Bank and Trust, a small bank in the Cayman Islands, Georgetown. It was controlled again by the same guy, William Walker. Walker is just a nominee or front owner of IC and Skyways. In the case of IC and its successor company, Intel Co-Operation, they both vanished after they were exposed in the Washington Post. After Skyways became embroiled in the Bath-White dispute, it registered in Texas and changed its name to Skyway International. But it apparently continues to be owned by the same Saudi Arabians. Of the $3.6 million sent out by NEPL through IBC and IC, about $1.7 million ended up in the Swiss bank account designated for the Contras. IBC kept about $400,000, while IBC kept $400,000. IC kept $1.5 million. All right. Also involved in this was a registered agent, World Affairs Counselor, Inc., and Gulf and Caribbean Foundation. We talked about Gulf and Caribbean. It was controlled by Midland, Texas oilman and friend of George Bush, William Blakemore. There are at least two other people who are connected to both Blakemore and Skyway's aircraft leasing through Jim Bath, Jack Trotter, and Walter Mitchner. Skyways had deposits at Mitchner's Allied Bank, two different ones of them. In '84, Bath borrowed $550,000 from InterFirst Bank in Houston, supposedly, according to the bank records, to facilitate aircraft purchase. As collateral, Bath pledged $500,000 CD in the name of Skyway Aircraft Leasing. However, when the note became due and Bath was having trouble paying it off, a bank document dated in '86 stated that the purpose of the loan was to make a down payment on a 25-acre plot of land on Lake Houston, not the bank, or not the aircraft that he supposedly was going to buy. And one of the previous owners of that particular tract of land was Jack Trotter. That was when Bath asked White to help him cover the note. When White refused, Bath got mad. Bath then sued White and was able to get a judge to order that the property White owned be turned over to pay off the note. Again, White doesn't want to have anything to do with it. But somehow this judge sided with Bath. White said he believes that Bath was using Skyway's money, which belonged to the CIA, to speculate in Houston real estate, which is exactly what the CIA pays people to do. When the real estate went down, Bath turned to White for money rather than to tell Skyway owners that he had lost it. 4 of the top officers at Skyway came to Bath's company from Azizma's Buffalo Airways. So again, these are all, some of them had worked for Saudi Arabian Airlines. All of this is together. One of those guys, George Selman, resigned from Skyways in 91, just a few months after the Houston Post was talking about their, started reporting on Bath. So he wanted to get the hell out of Dodge. The former director of operations, William Crocker, resigned right after him. Crocker worked at Buffalo Airways for 4 years before leaving in May to join Skyways. So as soon as somebody started reporting on this, they all bailed out, is the bottom line. And Crocker also worked for Aero Air, which was a CIA proprietary used for weapons trafficking. Lastly, George Lovell, Lovell, was another guy that worked there. He joined Bath's company in 87 after working for Buffalo Airways. Lovell had also worked for Saudi Arabian Airlines. So again, these are all CIA proprietaries. In October 90, the Houston Post investigative reporter John Mecklin reported that the DoD was paying millions of dollars more than necessary to buy aviation fuel from a Bath company at Ellington Field. The Post reported that Bath's company, Southwest Airport Services, was charging the government military aircraft anywhere from 22 cents a gallon to over 40 cents a gallon more than the price that he sold it to for the Air National Guard base. In December 1990, Mecklin reported in the Post that the Department of Defense had paid Bath more than $12 million in contract overruns for aviation fuel. Again, this is how they money launder out of the Department of Defense. From November 1985 through November 89, the government paid Southwest Airport Services more than $16 million for fuel under contracts that estimated the company would be paid 3.6. 16.3. Southwest Airport Services also had a sweetheart lease at Ellington from the city of Houston, under which it paid $650 a month. Bath's company won the lease in April of 85 under a lottery, but the lease had not been offered to any other fuel firms since that time. The first building project that Bath and White did together was an apartment project in Humble, close to Houston. To get the money to buy the land, Bath put White in touch with Sergio Lusani. Lusani was a loan broker who had his office at Mainland Savings. He's a PhD economist from Italy, another PhD economist. Luciani was brought into Mainland by Raymond Hill's right-hand man, Ron Bearden. Luciani's name appeared in the news in Houston regarding 2 sensational events. The first was a mysterious one-car accident resulting in the death of a Houston businessman, Ernest Allred. Luciani had brokered a Mainland loan to Allred and received a Porsche for his payment. The loan had gone bad and Allred was in trouble when he met his untimely demise. The second event was the arrest and conviction of Martha Marie Preston. She was dubbed the crack queen. She was in control of the crack cocaine industry in Houston. Luciani sold a convenience store in Houston to the crack queen, which she turned into a crack distribution outlet. One mainland borrower said that when he was at Mainland Savings, Luciani introduced him to Leopard Capaldi, who's Detroit Mafia. After Mainland Savings hit the skids, Luciani returned to Italy. But in early 1982, when White went to see him at the urging of Bath, Luciani was going strong. White said he had put together a mortgage package for financing the apartment complex. Then Luciani introduced him to Laddie Howard, who worked at Drew Mortgage. Drew Mortgage was a subsidiary of Lamar Savings. Howard arranged a 100% loan from Lamar, which meant that White and Bath did not have to put any money down. Howard had originally worked at Mainland Savings, because of course he did. He also later worked at Sunrise Savings out of Boynton Beach, Florida, at their branch in Texas. After the loan application was submitted to Lamar, Luciani informed White that it had been rejected by Austin Savings and Loan. White told Bath, "The next thing I know, it is back on." So all Bath did was pick up the phone and said, "Yeah, they want to do it, so you need to do it." And it was done. So they signed, White and Bath, who were at this point were still in partnership together, a $5 million promissory note to Lamar to buy the land and build the apartment complex. By December 83, the project was finished and the units were leased out. June of 84, Bath and White renewed the $5.2 million note to Lamar. But even though the complex was completely leased out, the cash flow was not enough to retire the debt. By the summer of 85, White said they were more than $200,000 behind in their payments. So Lamar arranged for them to borrow the $200,000. You can't make your payments, so we're going to give you the money to make the payments. This is a repeating pattern through this entire thing, because they're doing business for the CIA as front people, even if they don't know they're doing this. So if you can't make the payments, they're going to make the payments for you by borrowing money from another one of their network savings and loans. The papers were drawn up by Raymond Hill's law firm in Mainland, and they got a second mortgage. By spring of 86, Bath and White were in default on both loans, which again has happened repeatedly through this book. Lamar wanted us to sell to Manzoor Harani, White said, but that would have left Bath and White still owing the $260,000 to Mainland. So instead, Lamar took the property back and Mainland forgave the note. So they just wrote the note off but gave it to somebody else? Yeah. Lamar then conveyed the property to Harani, the Lebanese investor who had done business with Robert Corson and was good friends with Orrin Hatch. A former high-ranking officer at Lamar told Harani, said that Harani gave them an in with the Reagan administration. Before Lamar was taken down by the feds, we and Harani had a conference call with Senator Orrin Hatch and talked about our bailout proposal. Harani flew copies of the real estate owned paperwork list and got to Danny Wall, who was chairman of the Federal Home Loan Bank Board, and Orrin Hatch, along with Senator Jake Garn and the White House. Vice President Bush and Ronald Reagan. Meanwhile, across Houston, another CIA asset was struggling for his financial life. By the middle of 1987, Vision Bank savings money had run out, and Robert Corson was having financial problems. But one land deal that he was able to get a little walking money from was the purchase of 283 acres in Houston. Corson bought the land in late 1985 with a real estate company, weirdly out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, called Balama. Tomorrow, we're going to find out about Balama and Chicago. So that's it for today. And I don't see Bridget. I don't know what happened to her. That's crazy. Let's see. Stellar, I see Ron. Come on up if you guys want to talk. Stellar, I'm going to go ahead, Stellar. I'm going to make you a co-host. Just to make sure we don't get dropped. Go ahead, Stellar.
Good morning. Just out of curiosity, with all of this information and stuff, have any of these people come to justice? I mean, I know that Oliver North hasn't, but like, have any of these that?
Some people did go to jail, but we still lost all of the money. There are several of these people that were involved in this, the low-hanging fruit. None of the people in charge went to jail, but there were some sacrificial lambs offered up.
They freaking suck.
Yeah. I mean, all of the stuff points to, I mean, Oliver North should have never been ever allowed out of jail, ever. In all of the shit that he did, he should have spent the rest of his life in jail. And the same is true with that Fayars guy that was the DEA/CIA/ whatever that ran the entire operation down. Nothing ever happened to him. Very little happened to Oliver North. But all of the kingpins behind this and all of the people orchestrating it inside of the CIA, none of those people were ever held accountable. Alicia, go ahead.
Hey, mine's more of a comment this time, but because I grew up in some of the areas, or near some of the areas discussed in this chapter, and it's kind of reframing just some of the environment that I grew up in around a little bit, and I just at the end of it keep coming back to, like, how can anyone actually trust the government with our money? I mean, quite frankly, it doesn't matter if you believe us or the books or any of this. Like, there's just so much corruption that it's just like why are we funding HUD at all? You know, why is this allowed to continue at all levels? I just keep coming back to that.
I do too. But everything the government does, other than defense and foreign relations and interstate commerce, everything else it does is unconstitutional. Literally everything else it does is unconstitutional. Every bit of the agencies, the Fed, no matter what you look at, it's all unconstitutional. And it has been established and funded by representatives and senators that are all, as you can see in this book, they're all in on it. Orrin Hatch, Kemp, Benson, both sides of the aisle. This has never been a partisan thing. They're all in it together.
Exactly. And it's just like, I just come back to like people are gonna be like, oh, we can pass laws. Like, you can't, there's no laws you can pass to like stop crooks like this, you know, in my opinion. Like, you just got to stop funding it. Guys, bleed the crime dry. And that's the only way I see out of all of this, just cutting off the funding source.
And you know, as soon as you do that, just like with USAID, which is one of the most unconstitutional things that was ever done, they scream like stuck pigs. But at least we're starting down that road, something that's never been done before, because all they do is basically move them and rename them and keep them going. And that's not the case. So, Megan Newt, go ahead.
Yeah, I have never considered myself a aficionado of book clubs, but I'm telling you, Colonel, you kind of sucked me right into this gig. I am going to go out here on a limb and say that I actually admire the size of the balls it takes to pull this shit off for as long as they've done it. And then, like you said, you never or rarely see accountability when it's brought to the light of day. And again, it's I've said this before. What do you do when the entire system that an American citizen has the ability or supposed ability to use actually is so corrupt that you can never get a redress for any grievance? It just floors me.
Yes. And you know what's interesting, because I too often but I don't know that it took so much as balls to do this. The beginning of it's an evil genius, I guess is what I would call it. Um, when they created the CIA and its supposed intelligence with all of these, cloak and dagger kind of connotations, and we're dealing with the nation's top secret stuff, and they developed the phrase national security that gave them a rubber stamp to hide every fucking thing that they've ever done behind. That's an evil genius thing to do. But once you've got that, you literally have the license to do anything. So I don't even think it's courage or big balls. I think it's literally these, just like the mafia, who knows that when they own the politicians in New York, they can literally walk down the street, shoot somebody in the head, and they're not going to pay the price for it, because they already own the people and the justice system that would hold them accountable. And that's what we have had creep up in the United States. So by giving them that national security rubber stamp at the very beginning of it and allowing them to hide their crimes, and the very few people that ever had, I think it's the people that tried to expose this that have the balls, because every one of them end up dead. Those are the really people that have big conies. And, like Congressman Leo Ryan, who we've talked about a million times, he went to Guyana to expose the CIA and the Jim Jones child trafficking and all of that other shit, shot him dead on the tarmac. Okay, lock that away. Nobody else is going to talk about it because they know exactly what's going to happen to him. So there's so many people that have Danny Casolaro, Gary Webb, that have had the courage to speak out. This guy, Pete Bruton, and they will do their best to destroy you if you kind of shake their boat, rock their boat. Go ahead, Beggar Nuke. Did you have a follow up?
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, I'm actually surprised, and I'm leaning toward eventually this could be one of Trump's things, that we haven't developed another lever of action that can be employed. I mean, these folks have been getting away with this for so long.
Yeah.
We need a counteract to the CIA and the deep state.
So,
and until that happens, and I know a lot of people don't want to hear this, but Colonel, you were in the military. What do you do to the enemy?
So
at some point, talk is not going to do any good. You have to take some action.
So I think there's going to be action taken. And I don't attempt to forecast the future. I think what's being done right now is exposing how corrupt our judicial and congressional people are. They flagrantly commit mortgage fraud, immigration fraud. I think all of that is being done right now for the purpose of establishing the corruption that we talk about every day. Um, and once you've established that the entities which you would seek justice from, your only recourse is military tribunals. And I know people use that for a lot of other things, but it really does come down to real national security and the survivability of our country. And the charges of sedition and treason are normally held in a military tribunal. And it just so happens that we have all of these new judge advocates being set up under the guise of immigration judges in these ICE hearings. So I think there's a whole lot of preparation going on for something that is a future operation. And you obviously have Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI, setting out the agenda of calling people out, telling everybody Mockingbird media still exists today, confronting people about the misinformation about Russia, about the whole COVID, about 2020. All of this stuff is going to come out. And once the table is set, the only avenue that you're going to have available to you is the military. That's what I think. Stellar, go ahead.
Yeah, because it seems like all of these agencies and stuff and these people, like if they're covert stuff, it's all really bad. So I would just like try to figure out, like, how do we get rid of all of these different agencies? And what the AI says is legislative process, electing representatives who align with our views. Otherwise military. Otherwise it's going to take forever. Sorry.
No, and it doesn't do you any good to participate in fake elections with systems that they steal the elections from as well. So I think once you establish the election fraud, you basically have a constitutional crisis. You do not have a body of people either in the House or the Senate that actually represents the people. They've conflated the illegal immigrants in the consensus. I mean, literally, we do not have a constitutional government right now, by any stretch of the imagination. And I think once you lay that out and the gravity of that sets in, that's going to be the only recourse.
And I see that the Chevron deference was a huge thing because it said that, they don't have the overreach of powers. Correct. Like how they were doing. So Correct. That was really huge. And it opened up the door because the SCOTUS used, saying that it was unconstitutional Correct. Towards the people. Correct. And so this opens up the door for us as the people to use the Constitution Correct. To fix things. Correct. Thank you so much.
Yep. You got it. Jillian?
Hi, this sounds like a very important discussion, so I'm going to be under a minute here. My situation is on a much smaller scale, but exactly aligned with what you're saying. I have been stalked for 14 years. It's been turned around onto me. My pinned tweet says it all, but I've been gagged by the media, and I'm about to be gagged again tomorrow in Maryland. I live in Ohio. However, my abuser lives in Maryland, and I just want to say quickly to everybody in here, please take a moment to read my pinned tweet, because after tomorrow, I am gagged once again from talking about my son's death.
And that is all. That is all. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Meg.
Yeah, I don't want to detract too much from the book club thing here, but Alpha had an interview with Juan O'Savin a couple days ago, and he laid out what we think is about to really roll out here. And if Trump pulls the trigger on what Juan talked about, he was saying that we're going to have to declare a national security emergency to put what you just talked about, Colonel, into place. And I want to thank you for, like I said, you holding these spaces and exposing all this. And your words of encouragement are greatly appreciated by anybody that listens to this. I mean, we're being hit left and right with poor me, poor me, poor me. And I'm trying to get the word out myself, but I don't have the voice that you do. And like I said, I just want to say thank you. You were the light that's getting the bushel pulled off. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I will tell you guys, you know me, I just shoot straight. I don't agree with everything. I do think some things are put out there for us to push back on, to show our level of discernment. And I have, if I was actually worried, I'd tell you guys I was worried. I don't see anything happening right now that isn't in line with all of their empire building falling down around them. And not just here in the United States, across the world. You see day by day by day us drawing closer and exposing the EU, exposing NATO, exposing the entire fiasco in Ukraine. And there's the voices are being amplified that are saying that, as opposed to the people that are like Chicken Little running around saying the sky's falling all the time. So I take a lot of encouragement from that. But anytime that I note something that's not right, I definitely talk about it. So Ron, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I thought it was interesting when you said that you had been working on Evergreen aircraft. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Just a little side note there. But you mentioned the Carlyle Group. I don't think people really understand. I don't know if people really truly understand what the Carlyle Group was. And it's a very, very big deal. And it was they were on the I believe they were on the one of the top floors of the World Trade Center. That was where they had, and there were a lot of people who were really concerned about things that were going on at the Carlyle Group, and they were all told to bring their evidence and have a conference on the morning of 9/11 at the top floor. And only one guy didn't make it because he got stuck in traffic. But I mean, you know, the key individuals there, obviously Bush. But you had the Bin Laden family. You had you kind of already said that, but you had James Baker, Frank Carlucci rather, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld. I mean, all these guys, Marvin Bush, Bin Laden family. I mean, all these guys were there. And I mean, they basically sat right at the convergence of the CIA, the DOD, the NSA, PNAC, SAIC, Halliburton, Booz Allen Hamilton, all these guys. I mean, Carlyle Group is a big deal. And when you said that, it just really kind of alarm bells went off in my head. So I just wanted to share that.
It's a very big group. It's a very big deal. They were involved in all kinds of different things. So anyway, but their primary deal was to make profit. It's a private equity entity, and their whole deal was to make money off of war. And they bought up large stock positions in basically all the primary military industrial complexes. And then, you know, basically we go to war for the next 20 years and they all get rich off of people that are dying in a foreign country, namely our military and civilians, and they make money off of it. So
if memory serves, weren't these the guys that were that they were doing the kind of the clearinghouse for a lot of the bonds and whatnot, and it was a lot of the 10-year bonds that were just about ready to come due, that were done right after the fall of the Soviet Union, where a lot of these guys went over and they kind of pillaged the Soviet Union for all of their natural resources. these once these bonds are about ready to come due, 9/11 occurs, and then the SEC miraculously says, you know what, we've got such a backlog, we're just going to not do any checking on any of this stuff for about 2 or 3 weeks so we can catch up. And so all these bonds went right through without ever getting double checked for malicious or malintent.
Well, originally this organization was set up by some people of some very old blood, like the T. Rowe Price, a derivative of the Harriman Brown and the Mellon family. And then a lot of other people were brought in to it with some very interesting names, some of which you named. So yeah, if anybody's interested, I just suggest you go do a little research on the Carlisle group, because their big claim to fame is making money off of war any way they can. So, all right. That's it for today. So have fun, everyone, tonight. I will see you back tomorrow. And then we'll talk about the rest of the week's schedule. So I am going to have the show early tomorrow. It's going to start at 3 o'clock instead of 4 o'clock, because we're taking my son to see Santa Claus at 5. So just annotate your schedules accordingly. Obviously, the recording will be on Rumble if you guys miss it. But we're going to start at 3 tomorrow, just FYI. So take care, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow. See ya.